It's another year. The post 2008 AFC's title hangover. Chad Henne was still your starting quarterback at the beginning of the season. The Dolphins started off with wins at Buffalo and Minnesota, won 2 straight on the road. That's a great way to start a season. And then, woof. And then Chad Henne was a quarterback. Eventually was replaced by Chad Pennington, who lasted
2 snaps,
a quarter.
No, I think it was the first series
against Tennessee. In a game they wound up winning, and then they had to start a Thursday night game with Tyler Thigpen against the Chicago Bears and got beat 16-0. And we've seen some bad offensive football by the Dolphins in recent years, pre-Mike McDaniel. I don't know that we saw anything like that night. Oof, that was bad. Anyway, Dolphins lost 16-0, wound up going 7-9. They made a trade, maybe the most interesting thing of the whole season. They had the 12th overall pick in the draft that year, traded with the Chargers, who wanted running back Ryan Matthews, who never panned out. Dolphins got the 28th pick, which they used on defensive lineman Jared Odrick. They also got, I want to say, a second-round pick that they used on Koa Misi, and then they got a linebacker by the name of Tim Dobbins.
Mm-hmm. You glossed over the trade for Brandon Marshall, who was going to be the big receiver that made Chad Henne a respectable NFL quarterback. That never happened. You just glossed
that year? I messed it up. I knew you'd remember everything related to Brandon Marshall, so that's why I figured let me leave it out.
After working with Brandon Marshall, I now feel sorry for Chad Henne. Which is coming from me. That takes a lot, because I was not a Chad Henne fan, never was, probably never will be. But after being subjected to Brandon Marshall abuse for an entire season, I now feel sorry for him.
And then this is when, I don't remember if it was that well known at the time, but this is where the player who was highly productive for the Broncos, they traded him to the Dolphins for 2 second-round picks, as I remember. And then it didn't take that long for us down here to say, ooh, this dude's high maintenance. And then he wound up going from team to team to team. And I don't know that anybody has played for as many teams in the NFL during their career who was as talented as Brandon Marshall. And there was a reason for that, and a reason which I'm going to guess you're fairly familiar with.
Yeah.
To 2011, which was a year of the lockout, where the Dolphins drafted Mike Pouncey in the first round of the playoffs. Tony Sparano was fired at the end of the year. Todd Bowles finished out. Todd Bowles, current Tampa Bay Buccaneers head coach, and the Dolphins wound up going 6-10, I believe. No, or Matt Moore came in and replaced an injured Chad Henne, was very good down the stretch. 6-3 in the final 9 games, and I will make the argument he should have been given way more of a shot to win the starting job in 2012. And now we get to 2012.
Hold on. I want to talk about 2011, because I would argue to you that was one of the best Dolphins team I ever covered before this season, primarily because you had a lot of good frontline players. Brandon Marshall, everybody knows how I feel about Brandon Marshall. You had Devon Best, you had Brian Hartline, you had Anthony Fasano, you had Charles Clay, very good offensive weaponry. You had Reggie Bush in the backfield. Reggie Bush was a 1,000-yard back. And then Matt Moore. The reason why that team struggled earlier in the season, Brian Daboll was the offensive coordinator. He had just taken over. Literally, they had no offseason because of the NFL lockout, and they were not able to install the offense. And that's part of the reason why that team got off to an 0-7 start. Once Chad Henne had gotten out the way, Matt Moore was taken over. Him and Brandon Marshall just started developing hand signals and codes and things of that nature. The offense started to take off, and they either lost close games or blew teams out. Mm-hmm. And won, I believe, 6 of the final 9 games. Yep,
6-3 down the stretch. And Matt Moore was balling. He was playing some really good ball.
Matt Moore is another guy I want on the AllDolphins podcast.
Love Matt Moore. And they almost beat the Cowboys on Thanksgiving that year. They lost on the last second field goal. But it wound up being a lost season. In 2012, the Dolphins select Ryan Tannehill with the 8th overall selection in the draft. Not a fan of the pick at the time or now. This was Joe Philbin, also his first year, also the first.
What did you want? Hold on, wait. Time out. You're not a fan of the pick.
I hated the pick. I didn't want a quarterback that high. There was no it was Andrew Luck and nobody else. RG3 went second overall, and who knows what his career would have looked like.
So what you would have went Kirk Cousins, Russell Wilson? What do you want?
I don't know.
Nick Foles,
Darrell Revis Island, Darrell Revis, maybe. Who else?
So you wanted to roll with Mac Moore?
Absolutely. I felt he had shown enough at the end of 2011 that he deserved a shot, and the Dolphins passed. I'm going to look it up real quick. The Dolphins passed some really good players to force Ryan Tannehill, who I don't think anybody in their right mind would have thought that dude needed to be the 8th overall pick, with all due respect.
All kinds of tools raw needed to be developed, and you never know. I mean, the same thing was said about Patrick Mahomes. Raw tools need to be developed. Same thing was said about Josh Allen. Raw tools need to be developed.
Time out. I mean, Josh Allen, you're talking about a physical freak, so he doesn't compute. Ryan
Tannehill has upper echelon physical traits.
Pat Mahomes was like a baseball prospect type pitcher. That's the kind of athlete he was. The only thing is he played in a wacky offense as Texas Tech, and can he play in a structured offense? And he's a little bit, their game is a little bit wild. Okay, big one. So the Dolphins could have had, instead of Tannehill, Luke Kuechly, Stephon Gilmore, Fletcher Cox. It wasn't the Darrell Revis draft. I'm mistaken, but they could have had Kuechly, Stephon Gilmore, Fletcher Cox. Why are you shaking your head? No. Instead of a complete force of a guy who had been a wide receiver at Texas A&M, who I don't think anybody saw as a slam dunk first-round pick quarterback choice. This guy's going to be a star. It was all along, this guy's a project, and you have somebody on your team.
Well, hold on. Okay. We're of the opinion, and both of you have shared this opinion, that you keep picking a quarterback till you finally get that dude, right?
And not at the cost of landing a complete stud with the 8th overall. You don't pick a project with the 8th overall.
There's no guarantee you're going to get a stud at the 8th overall pick. You can pick a dud at the 8th overall pick. You can pick a Deion Jordan. You never know. You can pick a Charles Harris. You never. Don't act like everything is given to you.
By the way, Luke Kuechly coming out of college was a complete checks all the boxes, slam dunk, that guy can't miss player. And
did they need a linebacker? No, they didn't, because they had Kevin Burnett, Carlos Dansby, and Cole Misi. Stephon
Gilmore was a complete stud. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know if he wasn't a slam dunk that Kuechly was, but he was a complete stud. And again, Omar, it wasn't the idea.
I'm picking a good cornerback. I'm picking a quarterback that I think can be a franchise player, and he wasn't, but I didn't know that at the time. Over a stud quarterback, over a stud linebacker, over a stud defensive tackle. And you have no guarantee that you were going to get those studs.
Okay, except that now you can't use that argument and then bitch about the Dolphins sending a 2nd and a 5 to the Cardinals for Josh.
We knew he was a dud, though. We knew he was a dud.
Then the Dolphins should have known, along with the entire scouting community, that Ryan Tannehill was meh as a quarterback prospect.
He had started 19 games. Are we really going to fight about Ryan Tannehill here?
Yes, we are. And then the Dolphins compounded their mistake by hanging on to the dude. And by the way, I like Ryan Tannehill as a guy, but then they compounded with the problem by hanging on to him for 7 years, which is why I have nightmares right now. I wake up in a sweat that we're doing the same thing all over again with a quarterback who's better than Tannehill, but still right now has shown a ceiling. The 2013 season was quite eventful for the Miami Dolphins, if you recall. Omar, you recall what happened in 2013?
No. Second year, Bullygate.
Oh, one of the wildest, craziest seasons.
I've added too much context and insight to Bullygate. Go ahead, wrap it up.
The Reader's Digest version of the events of 2013. This was the second year under Joe Philbin. The season started innocently enough, and all hell broke loose in October with an incident that happened between Jonathan Martin and Richie Incognito on a Monday, I want to say.
In the lunchroom?
In the lunchroom, in the cafeteria. Yep.
He had enough.
Yeah, he had enough. led to the suspension of Richie Gate investigation by the NFL. Jonathan Martin left. Richie Incognito got suspended. It was the season, however, of the wake-off. Thursday night win on Halloween against
That was the night it began. That was the night it began.
No, that was a Thursday. It began earlier in the week.
Yeah, that was a Thursday because did he play in that game? I can't remember what the situation was, but because I remember Richie played in that game, and it was the last game, and I'll never forget it. Not only was it the wake-off, but Richie left. It was on Halloween, and Richie left in a Superman costume. Left the locker room in a Superman costume, and I will never forget that. That was the last time I saw Richie in person for a very long time before he came back with Buffalo. I like Richie. I respect Richie. Richie went through a lot. Richie caused a lot. But as I will always say, I do not put Bullygate on Richie because Richie was being a good teammate. He was being the best teammate that he knew, having grown up in an abusive household. And
correct. The intention was not the intention was not bad.
Yeah.
The delivery and the method.
Yeah. And if you look through the 400 and whatever pages of the Ted Wells report, and which was basically just a documentation of their text history, Richie was being a big bro. And unfortunately, a lot of that stuff ain't healthy, and it's certainly not kosher in this climate of the world.
No, he didn't necessarily have the proper recipient of his tough love approach or whatever, however you want to describe it. You know what I remember from that Halloween night game? Driving home from the stadium and halfway home, realizing I had left my phone in the press box and having to turn around and go get it. Not a happy camper that night, but that was a great game. Also, 2013 was the year of the Michael Thomas game where they signed him off the 49ers practice squad on a Tuesday. He plays that Sunday against the Patriots, has the game-clinching INT in the end zone against Tom Brady in the 24-20 win, puts him in a position to be able to make a run for a playoff spot, and the Dolphins completely crapped the bed the final weeks of the regular season, wound up 7-9 and out of the playoffs.
Yeah, that was the whole era of the Joe Philbin era, maybe even the Tony Sperano era, maybe even the Adam Gase era, where they're in it in December and then poop the bed. I mean, not that they didn't do it this year as well. But
they made the playoffs at least before they pooped the bed. As I recall, correct me if I'm wrong, and you have the media guy in front of you, I'm going by memory. This was a game where they needed one win in their last two games, and they wound up scoring 7 points total against Buffalo and the Jets.
Yep. I mean, it is what it is. That was the second year of Ryan Tannehill as a starter. He wasn't good the first year, and he was really mediocre that year too. But, you know, you prop up your quarterback and you blame everybody else for his issues. Remember, they also traded for Byron.
That would never happen, ever, that the quarterback would get all the credit and none of the blame when things went south. That would never happen with the Dolphins. I don't know.
That was also a year that they traded for Bryant McKinney. Remember that?
Oh man, yeah, that was a late season.
That was after Richie. That was after Richie and Jonathan had banished, so they had to patch up the offensive line. I think that might have also been the year Nate Garner suffered like his tremendously bad concussions, and after being hit in the helmet by a teammate, and which led to a lawsuit from Nate Garner that the Dolphins settled. That was just a bad year. But that's what happened when you had bad leadership.
2014 season, which was the last full season for one Joe Philbin as head coach. It was a season where the Dolphins wound up 8-8. Never really had a
full season. Okay. I thought it was the last season. No, you meant the last full season.
Yes, and we'll get to an important development and event there. Dolphins were 5-3 at the halfway point after spanking the Chargers 37-0. Kind of faded down the stretch a little bit.
Storyline of Dolphins franchise fading down the stretch.
Pretty much. And a couple of things that stand out. There was a game against Denver Peyton Manning in Denver. At Denver, Dolphins lost 39-36. Ryan Tannehill, by the way, that was his best season with the Dolphins. I would say even better in 2016. And look at that coaching staff. It included Zach Taylor. It included Dan Campbell. It included Ben Johnson, who is now the OC in Detroit and a hotshot head coaching candidate. So this was quite the coaching staff. And Dolphins still finish 8-8. Hold on, I'm not done. However, what stands out to me from that season is the Dolphins already had been eliminated from the playoffs. They beat the Minnesota Vikings. And Omar, I'm sure you remember this.
Mm-hmm.
Next to last game of the season, 37-35 on a block punt for a safety in the final minute by my good buddy Terrence Fede.
Mm-hmm.
Really, really good guy, by the way. Anyway, and after the game, we're in the locker room, and Stephen Ross gathers the journalists to tell him he's got a Christmas present for all of us in that we will not have to worry about a coaching search in the offseason because Joe Philbin will be back as head coach, and he was for 4 games.
Yes, and it probably was a move that he should have checked with his players in the locker room before he did that. You know what I always say, smart ownership, they always have a plant in the locker room, and honestly, a plant in the coaching staff. Now, clearly, during the Brian Flores era, they had a plant in the coaching staff. I don't necessarily feel like they had a plant in the locker room, but it allows you to keep an understanding of what the culture is and what the climate is. And in that climate in 2014, it was very clear to the players that they didn't want Joe Philbin back. And he returned the very next year, and I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit later, but they started out the season 1-3, and he got fired after that the London trip. Mm-hmm. And it was a team that was non-responsive to Joe because they didn't want him back.
They looked like they were going through the motions playing. There's a bunch of zombies playing early in that 2015 season. One last thing about the 2014 season. The last game of the season was against the Jets. And 2 things that stood out in that game is Lamar Miller had the franchise record with a 97-yard touchdown run, but they lost 37-24 to the Jets when Geno Smith from Miramar had a 158.3 passer rating.
This is kind of a pivotal year.
2015?
Oh, yeah.
Is it a pivotal year?
Oh,
well,
yeah.
It's the year that saw an in-season coaching change after the Dolphins, who for some reason had brought back Joe Philbin for a fourth year.
Stupidity, that would be the reason.
Okay.
You know what the one lesson is, and I hate to interrupt your history lesson here. The one lesson that I've learned in my 15 years of covering the Miami Dolphins team, there's a clear and well-defined difference between when you anoint leaders of men, head coaches, and when you anoint these offensive gurus that you hope can lead men. Unequivocally, and that was my greatest concern about Mike McDaniel when he got hired and got the job. Is he a leader of men? Because I've seen what happens when they're not a leader of men. Mm-hmm. And you're talking about Cam Cameron, talking about Joe Philbin, and I'll throw Adam Gase in there because I'm not saying he was a bad leader. However, Gase's style meant, or his ways meant, throwing people under the bus. And I don't think leaders do that.
No, that's not a leader. By definition, that's not a leader. And there was quite the contrast in 2015 after the Dolphins dismissed Joe Philbin after 4 games. The 4th game was a loss in London against the Jets, no less. And then he was replaced by Dan Campbell on an interim basis. And say what you want about Dan Campbell's X's and O's and game management and in-game decisions. But the dude, you want to talk about a leader of men? I mean, he is at the top right there when it comes to NFL head coaches.
And he is... I love and support, and you know this because we've now done 215 podcasts together. I support the players that become coaches, either position coaches, head coaches, scouts, executives, because, and you know who they are when you're in the locker room. They have an aura to them. They have an awareness to them. And I don't think, we saw his transition from a tight end to a coach, because I believe the Dolphins were the first team that hired him as a coach. And it was very evident that he was a leader.
Correct. No, and you and I have done this long enough to know players will respond better to a guy who actually has been in their shoes and have played in the NFL. That's just a fact.
Absolutely. And I say this all the time. I hate when a player is coming to you and telling you that there's an issue because he's actually on the field playing it, doing it, experiencing it, and telling you this is not going to work. And then the coach is all like, I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm doing. And that is the genesis of what their issue was with Vic Fangio. Sorry. Probably.
Okay. Oh, we went there.
Yeah.
Let's quickly wrap up 2015. And it was amazing. Those first two games under Dan Campbell, as we mentioned on the previous podcast, is the Dolphins were walking zombies in the first four games. Dan Campbell
didn't care. They didn't care.
And they
weren't walking zombies. They didn't care. They went through the motions. They went through the motions.
Omar, wouldn't that make you a walking zombie if you're going through the motions? I mean, anyway, Dan Campbell comes in. They do the Oklahoma drill like on the first day of his first practice, and then they go out and play at Tennessee. They whooped the Titans 38-10, and then they come home against the Houston Texans and have the most ridiculous first half I think I've ever covered. They were up like 41-0 at the half, wound up winning 44-26. Eventually, their lack of talent in a lot of different places caught up to them. They wound up finishing 6-10. Offseason arrives, and Campbell was one of the guys who interviewed for the head coaching job. They gave it to Adam Gase, and the rest is history.
I don't know if I agree with the lack of talent statement that you put on the table. That team had Jarvis Landry, had Kenny Stills, had Rashard Matthews, had Devontae Parker, had Lamar Miller. Ryan Tannehill was their quarterback, so mind you. They had some issues on the offensive line. Yes, they did. But, okay, and they had Cameron Wake. They had Ndamukong Suh. They had Olivier Vernon. Inside linebacker was an issue. It was. They had Brent Grimes. Rashad Jones. Safety was an issue. Safe cornerback was an issue. Okay, they had enough. They had holes. They had decent holes.
Okay. Sounds like something I just said, but I appreciate you validating my statement. 2016, which was a very, very cool year. First year of Adam Gase. The Dolphins want to talk about finding a way to win games at the end. Like, oh my Lord, the entire season started off 1-4, beat the Pittsburgh Steelers in October with the first of 3 200-yard rushing performances by Jay Ajayi. Wound up going on a run.
Do you remember how that season started?
It was Jay Ajayi being left behind when they played at Seattle because he was getting pissy that Arian Foster had beaten him out on the depth chart.
And we also had the kneeling. That was the beginning of the kneeling.
Yes, it was.
That lasted years for the Miami Dolphins and only the Miami Dolphins as an organization. And I remember being in that locker room after that loss. Yeah.
Yes, they lost the opener at Seattle 12-10.
Yeah, and the whole story was about kneeling and why they kneeled. And I remember specifically talking to the players who chose to kneel, and everybody but Arian Foster really couldn't explain why they chose to kneel at that time.
You're going to tell me Kenny Stills wouldn't have known?
No, he knew. He just really couldn't articulate it well.
Okay.
And on top of that, I remember that season because Arian Foster basically decided to quit football during the season.
But he did.
Yes. And I remember we had him on I Am Athlete, the radio show I used to do at Sirius. And I had to ask him about that. And it became a viral moment on social media because he basically confessed he woke up one day and he was just like, I don't want to do this anymore. And in fact, he had told Gase this. And Gase convinced him not to quit at that moment. And the more he stayed with it and the more he tried to push through it, the more he began to resent football. And Arian, as you know, was a very unique, interesting, don't put him in a box kind of football player. And I like and respect those guys because they have more to them, more context to them than just football. So when he was ready to walk away, he did.
No, and in fact, I wrote a story for AllDolphins.com at the time based off of that interview you guys did, where he talked about like the clinching moment for him is he's standing on the sidelines in the middle of a game thinking about the book he started reading at home and wanting to get back to that book. And I think at that moment, you're pretty much checked out. Arian Foster, by the way, of course, was part of the movie Draft Day, correct?
Yes. Excellent movie. We both highly recommend it.
Ray Jennings. He was Ray Jennings in Draft Day for those who have seen it. Anyway, Dolphins wound up. This was also the season. This was a very cool assignment for those of us who got the chance to do it. I got the chance to do it. I was working for the Dolphins website at the time. They had the trip to Southern California where they played at San Diego, followed by at Los Angeles.
Yeah, that was an amazing trip. That was an amazing trip, an amazing season.
Yeah. And they won those two games on their way to making the playoffs, which they clinched with Matt Moore at quarterback after Ryan Tannehill got injured late in the season. They got waxed in the playoffs by the Steelers, but that's a different story. Now come 2017, which corresponds.
I think you glossed over the fact that Matt Moore, not Ryan Tannehill, led them to the playoffs.
I just said that.
I know you said it, but you didn't give it the respect it was due.
Okay. Well, Tannehill got hurt against the Cardinals in early December. Matt Moore quarterbacked them to a win against the Jets on that Saturday night.
Matt Moore, your quarterback, who you wanted to play over Ryan Tannehill since 2012.
Trust me. And then they won at Buffalo in like an absolutely awesome game. This was a game where Andrew Franks kicked a game-tying field goal, 55 yards in tough weather conditions with no timeouts rushing onto the field. What I would argue is maybe the most clutch field goal in team history. If not, it's up there. Well, 2017 was the year of Jay Cutler because in training camp, Ryan Tannehill, who had decided against getting surgery for his knee injury the previous December, like on one of the very first practices, I remember very, very vividly. I'm watching. This was at in Davie. And Tannehill, they're running 11 on 11s. He's scrambling towards the right sideline between the two fields, and he takes a bad step, and you see his leg kind of just give way. And I'm like, I had my binoculars on him, and it was like, row, this is not good.
And instead of going with Matt Moore, which everybody would have been fine with inside the organization, Adam Gase at the time opts to pay Jay Cutler, what was it, $13 million that season? It was
10, but
it might have been 10. It was some obscene amount to come out of retirement, to come out of a TB booth, to quarterback his offense, primarily because he knows the offense. And to quote Adam Gase, I don't remember if this was a private or on-the-record conversation, and I don't care at this point.
It's truly, it's on the record now.
Yeah. He basically said, Matt won't do what I coach him to do. Matt will only play.
Sure, that was off the record. I don't recall ever that being part of the public record. But
okay, well, tough titty said the kitty.
I love that expression. Holy moly!
Yeah, and that was when I learned that some coaches basically want to feel like they're playing the game of Madden, and when they play the A button or the B button or the C button, that's where they want the ball to be thrown. Wherever they decided what play they're going to play, they want it to be thrown. They don't want a quarterback to change their plays or improvise or get creative or buy time in the pocket. Nope, they just want them to do exactly what they're told to do. And that was the moment when I realized I don't like those types of coaches.
Yeah, and 2017 didn't work out well. Dolphins wound up, what were they, 7-9?
6-10.
6-10, whoa.
Wow, you're wrong on a record? Holy smokes. It's a first. I can do hearts. I would do hearts.
You mean this?
Yes.
There it goes.
Oh, wow. You forgot a fact of a season? Holy smokes.
I remember those 6-10 and 7-9 seasons kind of,
they blend in together.
They kind of blend, yeah. Anyway, It wasn't a good season. Jay Cutler was one and done.
He basically quit on them during the season.
Oh,
He got his ribs broke. Let's be respectful.
You did.
He got his ribs broke, and after he got his ribs broke and continued to play, he basically played hot potato with the football, and just if you were getting close to touching him, he was throwing it.
And the worst part of that season may be, and yes, we understand that every team makes draft mistakes, but that was the year that TJ Watt wound up being drafted, I believe it was 30th in the first round of the NFL draft, where the Dolphins took Charles Harris.
Yeah.
Did not work out. Charles Harris, who has gone on to have a decent career with the Lions, had a good year. Had a good year last year, took a dip this year where it was a healthy scratch. 2018, because it's episode 218, which was the final year of Adam Gase's 3-year tenure as head coach. The year Ryan Tannehill came back from his torn ACL. It was also the year of the miracle in Miami.
That was a very interesting year.
It was, but it was.
Yeah, I had never covered a team like that. Tell your stories. Then we can get into the context.
Well, my story is that the Dolphins started off, I want to say they started off 3-0, unless I'm mixing my years, and maybe that was 2017. Anyway, this was a season 3-0, right? Okay, and including, remember there was a game against the Raiders where Jakeem Grant and Albert Wilson were racing down the field for a late game touchdown, doing a high five at the.
I thought they were throwing up deuces at each other.
No, they were giving each other a high five, like about the 10-yard line on their way.
Yeah.
To score a touchdown to clinch a win. It was a year Brock Osweiler was the backup quarterback and had one really good game against the Bears when they won in overtime, 31-28. And then it went south a little bit.
I will say this about Brock Osweiler. He's probably had the coolest NFL nickname NFL tattoo that I've ever seen, where he had his name tattooed on the back of his shoulders, Osweiler. Okay. Like, I'm sorry, that's creative. That was boss.
He was also a guy who was like actually stinking it up in training camp. And then the Dolphins had their scrimmage at Hard Rock Stadium. And our good buddy Adam Beasley asked him very diplomatically about his uneven performance in camp. And Osweiler looked at him like, basically, I've been doing great. And we're all
yeah. And we were all looking at each other like,
okay. So the Dolphins wound up
better than Brady Quinn telling us. Remember, I don't think it was that year. Remember when Brady Quinn was in camp and he threw like 3 interceptions a day, and then when I called him out on radio on it, he started saying that the coaches are telling him to throw interceptions so the DBs can get some work, and then the DBs were like, hold up, let's put this in context here. Nobody's telling you that, you just not very good. That guy was the worst quarterback.
Yeah, and this is a guy, mind you, who Dolphin fans were clamoring for in the 2007.
He was the worst quarterback I'd ever seen in the Dolphins jersey. Yeah. And I know there've been plenty in that you have a longer list than me. I only go 15 years. I know you say Brock Horde. No, no. It was a Heisman winner that you say was worse.
Well, Josh Heupel in camp, I don't know if he ever won the Heisman, but he was like in the Heisman contention, led Oklahoma to the national title in 2000 against Florida State, should have been UM, in that game. And he came to camp, and the dude could not throw. There were some claims afterward from his camp that he had a shoulder injury, which then brings up the point of, well, if he had a shoulder injury, why is he throwing in camp? Because the dude basically – he had no arm. Then again, he didn't have a great arm at Oklahoma. Become a good college football coach. Back to 2018, the Dolphins wound up. They put themselves at 7-6, I want to say, after that miracle in Miami against the Patriots when they won 34-33 on that crazy 2 lateral play from Tannehill to Stills to Parker to Kenyon Drake. And then they flopped down the stretch.
Mm-hmm. And losing the final 3 games against Minnesota, and this is where I enter the picture into the equation. At that point, Adam Gase had they had a number of like run-ins with players, and remember the Rashad Jones, Matt Burke beef, and there was like some offensive line issues and beefs going on. I forget like who was being forced to play out of position, or It was something going on. I couldn't even remember what it was. The Wake situation where Wake was Adam basically flat out told the media that Wake was cherry picking when he's in games, and and players just got so sick of Adam Gase throwing them under the bus that they, after the Minnesota loss, they basically decided that they didn't want him back. And they weren't tanking games, but they pulled themselves out of many instances in the final two games. And especially in the Buffalo loss, 42-17, to ensure in their mind that Adam Gase wouldn't be back. And that was the scene of the most odd and uncomfortable locker room that I'd ever been in my life, where we're basically going up to players after the season, after games, asking them, do you want Adam Gase back? Do you think he deserves another season? And everybody's like, I don't know. Like, that weather's really, it was really cold out there.
I'll play for whoever is the coach.
Yeah, I'll play for whoever's the coach. Yeah. It was, and I remember having some private conversations, and I'm like, word? Like, y'all are done? They were done. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that we should point out that season-ending loss against Buffalo, 42-17, was the first time Josh Allen beat the Dolphins. That was the end of his rookie year.
And I don't think he even deserved that, because literally that team was pulling themselves out the game after the first quarter, like player after player after player, and they just didn't want to play.
We should also mention that loss at Minnesota late in the season featured the one shining moment of Kalen Ballage's tenure with the Dolphins when he had like a 75-yard touchdown run. They also had a pick six or a fumble return for a touchdown by Minkah Fitzpatrick in that game. And then the rest of it was a complete ass kicking. I remember might have been like a lot too little.
It was that Minnesota game where apparently he did some like film breakdown. And he just threw guys under the bus, and they were just like done. And I was like, man,
yeah.
And that was the first time it should have happened to Joe Philbin, but that was the first time I'd ever felt like players had significant command over who was going to be coaching them.
Or who was not going to be coaching them.
Yeah.
So it was that after the season, Adam Gase was relieved of his duties to be replaced in February after the Super Bowl by Brian Flores. I cannot skip 2019 because there was such a turning point in Dolphin history. This was a year, of course, the Dolphins hired Brian Flores to replace Adam Gase and then proceeded to purge the roster, reset, rebuild, or tank, however you want to put it. I know Omar's
tank for Tua. That's what it was called. I know it because we labeled it.
Well, just because you and then 2-3 others media members decided tank for Tua.
2-3 other media members. It was the world, my brother.
I think it actually became more blow for Burrow than tank for Tua, if we're going to be honest about it. But
it eventually evolved to blow for Burrow after Tua suffered a very career-threatening, catastrophic hip injury. But let's not remember, this was the plan, and this was the plan from the organization from before Ryan Tannehill was the starting quarterback.
Okay, let's also not pretend that Burrow wouldn't have been the number 1 overall pick had the Dolphins.
He would have been, but he wasn't the genesis for it.
No. Well, I understand that. Well, part of it was that, and the other part of it was going to be like a couple of, Tua came into the 2019 college season like
the stud,
absolutely.
The greatest quarterback of all time, the can't miss prospect
of all time. He still was no Andrew Luck, but that's beside the point.
That's fair.
Anyway, so the Dolphins began, and this was the funny part. At the draft, they traded a 2nd and 5th round pick to the Arizona Cardinals for Josh Rosen, who then competes with Ryan Fitzpatrick, who had signed as a veteran to babysit the young guys or show them the ropes or whatever. And lo and behold, Brian Flores decides to go with Ryan Fitzpatrick as a starting quarterback. Eventually,
because he was clearly better than
correct. Correct. And because he was necessarily on board with the idea of it's okay to lose games, it gives us a better draft position. And eventually the Dolphins gave Josh Rosen a shot, a couple of starts. Didn't work out. Ryan Fitzpatrick was reinserted in the lineup, and about the halfway point
Josh
of the
Rosen
season,
sucked.
He did.
And Brian Flores would have played a very clear inferior quarterback.
Inferior.
While the team was sitting there, are we really tanking? Are we really tanking? Is this really what we're doing? Why do I want to be here if that's what we're doing? It was Brian Flores was protecting himself and protecting his locker room by starting Ryan Fitzpatrick, who he absolutely needed to start.
Okay. Anyway, about the halfway point of the season, the Dolphins started playing better. Eventually, wound up like 5-4 in their last 9 games to finish 5-11, including that very memorable win at Gillette Stadium in the season finale, 27-24, when it cost the Patriots a first-round bye, and the Patriots wound up getting beat by Tennessee at home in the first round of the playoffs in what would become Tom Brady's final game. The Dolphins beat Cincinnati the week before, contrary to popular belief. The Dolphins would not have clinched the number 1 overall pick with a loss in that game. They still would have needed Cincinnati to lose their regular season finale. And who knows whether that would have happened anyway. Dolphins wound up with the 5th overall pick, selected Tua, but that's for 2020. That was the 2019. And I would say 2019, the second half of 2019 was easily Devontae Parker's best stretch with the Dolphins.
Oh, very traumatic season.
Was it though?
Yeah, because you were signing guys on Tuesday and putting them in your starting lineup on Sunday. And then do you remember it was years later, I think it was the 2021 season, where Brian Flores, they started horribly. And then Brian Flores basically was like, I can't get players in 1 week and put them in the lineup the same week. And I was like, wait a minute. You did that all of 2019, hypocrite. It was traumatic just because of you begin this purge and this rebuild. And I remember you started it with the intentions of building the trenches and building the line in 2019, building the lines. Oh yeah, Chris Greer. I could bring up stories and columns.
Except here's the thing, though. If you in the first pick in that draft was Christian Wilkins, okay. If that was the idea, solely the idea, they wouldn't have traded Laramie Tunsil, which they did in 2019.
I mean, yeah, but you knew why they traded Laramie Tunsil. It wasn't just the offer was too good to pass up,
and they had a looming contract.
And they had a looming contract that they didn't want to sign to a player that they didn't really fully trust. So
to me, the 2020 season was about dump all of your expensive, middle of the road or slightly above average assets. Ryan Tannehill, Robert Quinn, a bunch of those guys like that. Accumulate as many high draft picks as you can. Clear up as much cap space as you can, and in 2020, boom, you go all.
Yeah, it was the rebirth. It was a tank. It was the.
It was a reset.
Okay, reset. Yeah. It was a reset in the tank. Because it wasn't just.
Yeah, you just love using that word tank.
Oh, it was a tank. Don't act like it wasn't a tank. It was, bro. Your owner was trying to bribe your head coach to lose games.
Allegedly. Allegedly, and the Dolphins were not sanctioned for that. They were sanctioned for tampering.
Okay.
Anyway,
let's move on. This is our past. We have paid our penance for it. We've still got a lawsuit from Brian Flores, who feels he was wrongfully terminated.
That thing's only 3 years old now. Jesus.
I mean,
the wheels of justice move slowly.
It's a class action lawsuit.
Sorry, you see, 3 years old.
It's a class action lawsuit. It's got a lot of validity to it. A lot of people have joined it. They are treating it like a class action lawsuit. And truthfully speaking, there is merit to the class action lawsuits about why African Americans have to take jobs that are bad jobs and basically required to sabotage themselves in their careers for the betterment of the franchise. And here Brian Flores is saying, I have an owner trying to entice me to lose games for draft picks. That's going to harm my career. And he's mad that when I win games.
The goal is
the problem, Omar, and I know here the sad reality is we could have like a really good discussion on this. And if you guys want in the comments, please put it there. The sad reality is that half the people who are watching this right now don't want to hear about this. Be very honest.
They don't.
Okay, and I don't want to keep beating a dead horse because you think you know I'm more.
But if you did a crime, you committed a crime, you take ownership for it, and you take your penance, and you don't cry about it. We don't have to bring it up and rub your nose in it all the time, but you did it. You did it.
What are you talking about?
The Dolphins organization.
But here's the thing, though. You're talking about the tanking situation, which they can't publicly admit, which the NFL can't publicly admit, which is why they got sanctioned for tampering.
Correct.
Okay. And the other issue is the one thing that you can say against Brian Flores is in suggestion of racism in hiring practices, and I think we all know it's there to a certain degree. But the thing is, the first team that he's suing is the Dolphins, who last I checked have an African-American GM who had a senior vice president who was an African-American, whose assistant GM also is African-American. I mean, it's not like the poster child for a racist organization. I mean, that's.
I would agree with you 1,000%. Hell, Steve Ross hired a woman as one of his top executives who he's all about, like, breaking down barriers and opening doors.
And giving everybody chances, correct.
But
let's not belabor the point very long. Go ahead, make your final point, but let's move on to something else.
But he did hire a coach with the intentions of not being very good in your first season. Now, was Brian Flores fired for being insubordinate? Yes, and that was part of the insubordination. But let's move on.
Okay, well, and again, the kind of point to that he was there two additional years.